Alien princess feared the cruel human groom until she met his gaze. Even in the morning light, the streets below were filled with movement. Citizens glided along the walkways, their skin glowing softly, reflecting the colors of the city around them. Lyra had lived here all her life, surrounded by beauty, tradition, and order. Yet today, for the first time in years, she felt a strange unease. The message had arrived yesterday, delivered by a fleet of starships from Earth. They said it simply: her future husband, a human, would arrive on Violia today. The words human groom echoed in her mind, along with the warnings her people had whispered for centuries. Humans were known as unpredictable, reckless, and dangerous. Stories spoke of their wars, their aggressive expansion across galaxies, and their strange, fragile bodies. To Lyra, a human sounded more like a threat than a partner. Her parents, the royal council, and the elders of Violia had explained it all carefully. The human has been chosen for the alliance. His people value courage and innovation. This marriage could bring peace and cooperation between our worlds, her mother had said, her voice calm but firm. Lyra had nodded politely, but inside, fear twisted in her chest. She had never met a human, and imagining one had filled her mind with dread. Now, standing on the balcony, she tried to calm herself. Her fingers brushed the railing, cold and smooth, and she drew a slow breath. "I will see him soon," she whispered to herself. "I must be strong. I must be the princess my people need me to be." From the sky, a small shadow appeared, growing larger as it descended. Lyra's heart raced. The ship moved with purpose, sleek and silent, until it finally touched the ground in the palace courtyard with a soft hum. A ramp extended, and from it stepped a figure that made Lyra's breath catch. He was tall, taller than most humans she had seen in hollow images, with broad shoulders and a strong posture. His skin was a warm brown, and his hair was dark and slightly messy. His eyes, however, were what struck her most. They were deep and steady, with a gaze that seemed to look directly at her without fear or judgment. There was a confidence in him, a calmness, and yet an energy that seemed alive and ready for anything. Lyra immediately felt the old fear she had carried for humans. She remembered the stories of humans acting without caution, of their brutality in battle, of the harshness in their eyes. But now, standing before this one, she found it difficult to see cruelty. The human moved with careful steps, his eyes scanning the palace and its surroundings, respectful yet observant. "Princess Lyra," a voice called. It was her father, the king. He stood behind her, his tall form elegant and commanding. "This is Commander Elias Kane of Earth. He has come to honor the alliance." Lyra straightened, forcing herself to nod. "Welcome to Violia, Commander Kane," she said, her voice steady even though her heart pounded. Elias bowed slightly, a gesture foreign to Violian customs but polite. "Thank you, Princess." "It is an honor to be here," he said, his voice calm and clear. There was no arrogance, no attempt to dominate, only respect. The first meeting was formal, with the court observing in silence. Lyra watched him closely, noting every movement. His hands were strong but careful. He did not fumble or act clumsy, despite his obvious unfamiliarity with Violian ways. Something in his expression made her pause. He seemed genuinely curious but not intrusive. He was studying everything, but he did so with patience, not haste. Then it happened. A small creature, one of Violia's native pets, darted into the ceremonial hall. It was a luminous being, small but delicate, and it tripped over the marble floor. Gasps filled the room. Before anyone else could react, Elias moved. He crouched low, careful not to touch anything around him, and gently lifted the creature. He examined it, then placed it safely back on its feet. The creature chirped softly, almost in gratitude. The entire court was silent. Some whispered among themselves, surprised at the human's careful hands and quick thinking. Lyra herself felt a jolt of something unexpected. This was not the cruel, reckless being she had imagined. Instead, she saw a human capable of thoughtfulness, of kindness. She could not stop her eyes from meeting his gaze. Elias smiled, faint but warm, and for a moment the distance between them seemed smaller. Lyra's fear, though not gone, began to shift into curiosity. After the brief introduction, the elders of Violia explained the first ceremonial test. Humans were unfamiliar with these customs, so Elias would have to participate to prove respect for their ways. Lyra watched as he nodded, listening carefully, asking questions politely. He did not frown at the strangeness, nor did he dismiss it. Instead, he adapted. The first challenge was a puzzle, a series of floating crystal shapes that had to be arranged in a pattern representing harmony and balance. Lyra observed him, expecting him to struggle or fail, as many humans were thought to lack patience. Yet instead of rushing, he paused. He tilted his head, studied the shapes, and then with deliberate movements arranged them in a pattern that even impressed the elders. "Interesting," one of them murmured. "The human approaches the challenge differently but effectively." Lyra's eyebrows lifted. She could feel a mixture of disbelief and fascination. She had always assumed humans were impulsive, but this one was precise, thoughtful, and creative. The next tests would examine physical agility, endurance, and social understanding. Elias faltered in some moments. He tripped over a simple obstacle and hesitated during a social ritual. But in each case, he adapted quickly, using observation and logic. Lyra began to see a pattern. Humans were not cruel, but different. They approached problems in ways Virealians did not, often finding solutions that her people had overlooked. By midday, Lyra was no longer nervous. Instead, she felt a strange sense of excitement. Perhaps this human could be more than she had feared. Perhaps he could be a partner, a protector, a bridge between their worlds. After the tests, Elias requested a walk through the palace gardens. Lyra accompanied him, intrigued despite herself. The gardens were a maze of glowing flowers, reflective pools, and winding paths. Birds with shimmering feathers flew overhead, singing in melodies that Virealians understood as communication rather than song. As they walked, Elias paused to admire a rare flower. "I've never seen anything like this on Earth," he said softly, bending closer to examine its petals. "It's delicate, yet it thrives in a world I can barely imagine." Lyra felt a warmth spread in her chest. This human noticed beauty where others might see only differences. He respected her world not as a conquest, but as something to understand and appreciate. "I thought humans were all about conquest," Lyra said cautiously, testing him. Elias chuckled lightly. "Some are, some aren't. Just as some Virealians are strict and some are more open-minded, we are not defined by stories, we are defined by our choices." Lyra paused, struck by the simplicity and truth in his words. He had a way of seeing things clearly without arrogance or judgment. And somehow he made her feel less alone in the weight of her responsibilities. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the garden in golden hues, Lyra realized she had spent hours near him and had not felt fear once. She had watched, observed, and learned, and with each passing moment, her assumptions about humans, the cruel, reckless creatures she had feared, were being challenged. She looked up at Elias, who was watching a group of small creatures play near the water. His expression was thoughtful, calm, yet alive with curiosity. For the first time in her life, Lyra wondered what it would be like to trust someone completely, to see strength without fear, courage without cruelty. The day ended with a quiet dinner, where the palace servants served foods unfamiliar to Elias. He tried everything politely, complimenting each dish and asking questions about ingredients and traditions. Lyra observed him carefully, noting his respect and genuine interest. That night, as Lyra returned to her private chambers, she gazed out at the city once more. Her thoughts were no longer filled with dread, but with questions, curiosity, and a flicker of hope. Perhaps humans were not what the stories had made them out to be. Perhaps Elias Kane was different, and for the first time she felt a small spark of something new, anticipation for what tomorrow might bring. Little did she know, the next challenges would test not only Elias' abilities, but also her own courage, understanding, and ability to see beyond fear. And in those trials, the seeds of trust, respect, and perhaps something deeper would begin to grow. The morning light filtered softly through the palace windows, casting long, shimmering patterns across the grand hall. Princess Lyra stood near the entrance, watching as human commander Elias Kane adjusted his uniform. The human moved with confidence, yet there was a hint of nervousness in his posture, a subtle reminder that he was far from home, in a world governed by rules and customs unlike any he had known. Lyra's mind wandered to yesterday, to the moments she had observed him carefully. The small acts of kindness, the patience in solving the floating crystal puzzle, the gentle gaze he had shared with her, it had all left a strange warmth in her chest. She had expected cruelty, recklessness, a mind too sharp to care for others. Instead, she had seen something entirely different. Now, the elders had announced the next stage of the process, the ceremonial tests of harmony, designed to measure a potential groom's respect for Virealian customs, physical skill, intellect, and emotional insight. Lyra had heard the elders speak of these tests countless times. No human had ever attempted them before. Many Viorlians believed the species would fail at the first challenge. Commander Kane, Elder Vorian spoke, his voice smooth and deliberate, you are to participate in the trials of harmony. Each trial examines a specific quality, wisdom, strength, empathy, and understanding. Failure is not dishonor, but success demonstrates your ability to respect Viorlian ways. Elias inclined his head respectfully. I will do my best. I wish to learn, not merely to impress. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. Even in the formal setting, he spoke with humility, yet his words carried confidence. She wondered how a human could balance both at once. The first trial was the puzzle of reflection. A circular platform hovered in the center of the hall, surrounded by a ring of translucent spheres. Each sphere contained a miniature version of a scene from Viorlia's history, a city in construction, a river in flood, a festival in celebration. The task was to rotate the spheres until the images aligned in a pattern that represented harmony between nature, civilization, and life. Many Viorlians began at once, their movements swift and precise. They relied on memory, instinct, and training passed down for generations. Elias, unfamiliar with these ways, stepped back and observed quietly. Lyra felt a flicker of irritation. Could he really succeed? Could he, a human, understand patterns that even seasoned Viorlians sometimes missed? He tilted his head, studying the spheres, tracing imaginary lines with his finger in the air. Then, carefully, he began rotating them, not in the expected sequence, but in a way that tested connections between distant elements rather than adjacent ones. Lyra watched as the images slowly aligned, forming a unique, elegant pattern that no one had predicted. The elders murmured among themselves. Elder Vorian stepped forward, eyes wide. Remarkable! He does not follow tradition, yet his solution honors the balance of all elements. Lyra felt surprise mixed with admiration. She had expected failure, but instead she saw ingenuity. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but unpredictability could be a gift. The second trial was the test of agility. The candidate had to navigate a series of floating platforms, each moving at different speeds above a shallow pool filled with glowing liquid. Falling was not dangerous, but it would slow the participant and count against them. Most Viorlians approached the platforms carefully, gliding smoothly from one to the next. Elias paused, observing their movements. Then he leapt with a precision that startled Lyra. He did not move like the Viorlians. He moved differently, using momentum and balance in a human way. Several times he nearly missed a platform, but he corrected himself quickly. With each jump, he seemed to learn faster, adjusting to the rhythm of the platforms in ways no one anticipated. Lyra felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with admiration. He was capable, not in the way her people expected, but in a way that could match and even exceed them. She began to realize that human strength was not simply physical. It was courage combined with quick thinking, adaptability, and a willingness to act when needed. The next trial was the trial of empathy. A group of young Viorlians, each holding a small, glowing creature that emitted a subtle sound when frightened, was brought into the hall. The task was to calm the creatures without touching them. Many candidates hesitated, unsure how to soothe the beings. Elias knelt on the ground, speaking softly in a low, steady voice. He did not imitate the Viorlian tones, nor did he attempt the traditional calming gestures. Instead, he relied on gentle movements, soft hums, and careful observation. Slowly, the creatures relaxed, chirping softly, sensing no threat from him. Lyra felt her fear and skepticism melt further. Humans, she realized, were not all about brute force or domination. They could sense, adapt, and communicate in ways her people had not taught her to expect. His approach was different, but effective. He could inspire trust without imposing control. Finally, the trial that most frightened Lyra herself was the test of understanding. The human groom would have to negotiate a solution to a simulated conflict between two Viorlian factions. The factions disagreed over the use of a sacred river for irrigation and festival celebrations. The candidate needed to find a resolution that honored tradition while preventing harm. Lyra watched closely, curious what Elias would do. She expected him to falter or impose a simple solution that ignored nuances. Instead, he listened to each side, asking questions with patience. He acknowledged their concerns, spoke honestly about possibilities, and then suggested a plan that used both modern engineering and respect for tradition. A system of water channels that preserved the river's natural flow while allowing both factions to meet their needs. The elders were astonished. Elder Vorian smiled for the first time during the trials. A human has found harmony in a way Virelians may not have imagined. His mind is flexible, yet his respect is clear. Lyra felt her heart shift. This human, the one she had feared, was not cruel. He was capable, empathetic, and courageous. The fear that had filled her for months began to fade, replaced by curiosity and a growing respect she could barely admit aloud. As the day ended, the candidates gathered in the palace garden for reflection. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows and bathing the garden in amber light. Elias walked beside Lyra, his expression calm yet thoughtful. "You are quiet," he said gently. "You observe more than you speak. Are you satisfied with what you have seen today?" Lyra hesitated. She wanted to say what she felt but could not yet find the words. Finally, she said, "I did not expect you to succeed. I expected failure or perhaps recklessness, but you have surprised me." Elias smiled faintly, the kind that reached his eyes. "Humans are often misunderstood, and we misunderstand others in return. Perhaps fear is born from stories, not reality." Lyra nodded slowly. His words echoed her own thoughts. The fear she had carried for so long, the fear of humans, of this groom, was beginning to crumble. What remained was curiosity, admiration, and a cautious hope. They walked among the glowing flowers and quiet pools, exchanging small observations. Lyra found herself laughing quietly at some of Elia's stories of Earth, of human ingenuity and strange customs. For the first time, she felt the distance between them shrink, not because the rules of Virelia had changed, but because she had started to see him for who he was. By the time they returned to the palace, Lyra realized that the trials had changed more than Elia's. They had changed her. The fear, once heavy and cold, had softened into interest and cautious respect. And though she would not admit it aloud, she wondered what the future might hold if this human continued to prove himself not just capable, but honorable and kind. That night, as she prepared for sleep, Lyra reflected on the day. She could still feel the old warnings whispering in her mind. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable. But she could also feel a new truth taking root. Strength and courage were not the same as cruelty. A human could act with honor, empathy, and intelligence in ways she had not expected. And deep inside, she knew that tomorrow, the challenges would grow harder. The next tests would not only measure Elias' abilities, but also challenge her understanding of humans, tradition, and herself. But she no longer feared. For the first time, she looked forward to learning, to observing, and perhaps to discovering something extraordinary in the human she had once dreaded. The morning sun rose over Virelia, casting pale gold light across the crystal towers and glittering streets. Princess Lyra stood at her balcony, her eyes scanning the horizon. She had barely slept, her mind restless after the trials of the previous day. Elias Kane, the human groom, had impressed everyone. His intelligence, empathy, and courage had turned many skeptics into admirers. Even Lyra herself felt a strange shift in her heart. Fear had softened into curiosity and cautious respect. Yet beneath the calm of the morning, a sense of unease lingered. Whispers had reached the palace of factions unhappy with the human-Virelian alliance. Some opposed the union, fearing human influence. Others resented the attention that the royal family gave to outsiders. Lyra could not ignore the possibility that not all beings welcomed Elias' arrival. She sighed and turned away from the balcony, her mind unsettled by a feeling she could not name. Little did she know that unease was only the beginning of the day's events. Elias had asked to accompany her on a morning walk through the palace gardens. Lyra agreed, wanting to observe him more closely, to understand the human whose courage had begun to stir admiration in her chest. They strolled along winding paths lined with glowing flora, their footsteps echoing softly over the polished stones. "You move differently in these gardens than in the hall," Lyra observed. "You do not glide as we do, yet you seem balanced." Elias chuckled. "I suppose humans rely more on momentum and reaction than on grace. We adapt as we move. It's not always elegant, but it works." Lyra smiled faintly. She was beginning to enjoy his perspective. It was refreshing, different, and sometimes surprisingly insightful. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each second. Lyra froze, her instincts screaming danger. Elias immediately crouched, scanning the horizon. "Stay behind me," he said calmly, though there was urgency in his tone. From the sky above the palace courtyard, dark shapes descended, fast, sharp, and menacing. They were sleek ships, clearly not of Virelia or Earth design. Lyra's heart pounded as the attackers moved with precision, targeting the palace's defensive structures. Alarm bells rang, echoing across the city. Citizens scattered, their glowing forms flashing in panic. Elias did not hesitate. He reached for a device on his belt, a compact, multifunctional tool humans called a scanner and defense module combined. Within moments, he had activated a force shield that deflected the first wave of projectiles, saving dozens of nearby civilians. Lyra watched, astonished at his speed and calm in the face of chaos. "Elias," she whispered, fear and awe mixing in her voice. "I've got this," he replied, eyes sharp, scanning the attackers. "Move to safety, princess, I will protect you." Lyra wanted to argue, to insist on staying by his side, but instinct told her to follow his command. She ran along the garden paths as Elias advanced toward the incoming ships, using a combination of Virelian defensive technology and human ingenuity. His movements were precise, yet fluid, adapting to every new threat. The attackers' ships hovered close, firing pulses of energy. Lyra hid behind a crystalline tree, peering out as Elias calculated trajectories and redirected attacks. The Virelian defense system, powerful but rigid, struggled to respond to the sudden assault. Elias quickly identified the weak points in the attackers' formation and acted, coordinating with palace guards to neutralize the threat. Lyra could hardly believe her eyes. This human, whom she had feared and misunderstood, was saving her world with calm intelligence, courage, and decisiveness. He was not reckless, as the stories had warned, but fearless and focused in a way that inspired trust. As one of the enemy ships broke through the outer defenses and hurtled toward the palace, Elias sprinted toward it. Using his device, he projected a controlled energy field that forced the ship off course, directing it safely into the courtyard where it would crash harmlessly. He stumbled slightly on landing but quickly regained his footing. Lyra's chest tightened, not with fear for herself but with admiration. She realized something she had never considered. Human courage was different from Virelian composure. It was active, willing to face danger directly, and combined with intelligence, it became nearly unstoppable. The remaining attackers, seeing their formations disrupted, began retreating. Within minutes, the skies were clear. The palace guards cheered, citizens emerged cautiously from hiding, and the elders stared in awe at the human who had just turned the tide of the battle. Elias returned to Lyra's side, brushing dust from his uniform. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice calm, though his eyes held the intensity of the battle just past. Yes," Lyra said, barely finding words. "You saved countless lives. How did you do it so quickly?" Elias shrugged modestly. "I have experience in dangerous situations, but more importantly, I observe. I think before I act. Fear is natural, but it cannot paralyze you. You must act when necessary." Lyra looked at him, her fear dissolving further into something else: respect, trust, and even awe. She remembered the stories she had been told. Humans were cruel, dangerous, unpredictable, and now she knew they were incomplete, misleading, and wrong about at least one human. "Elias," she whispered almost to herself, I misjudged you." He glanced at her, his eyes steady. "Perhaps many do, princess, but courage, empathy, and intelligence can show the truth more clearly than any story." The aftermath of the attack was swift. The palace repaired the minor damages, and the citizens celebrated their safety, quietly admiring Elias from afar. The elders convened to discuss what had occurred, realizing that the human had not only survived the ordeal, but had saved countless lives and preserved the palace's honor. Lyra, walking beside Elias through the repaired gardens, felt a bond forming that she could not yet name. She had seen him in action, had witnessed his courage and skill, and something deep inside her shifted. She trusted him, not blindly, but with certainty that he would act with honor and protect those around him. As the twin suns set, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Lyra and Elias paused by a reflective pool. Their faces mirrored in the still water, and for a moment silence passed between them. "You were amazing today," Lyra said softly. "I never imagined a human could do all that. I feared you would be harsh, reckless, cruel even, but you were none of those things. You were perfect." Elias looked at her carefully, a faint smile forming. I am not perfect, princess. I only try to do what is right. But thank you, that means more than you know. Lyra felt warmth in her chest, a sensation she did not fully understand. Fear had once ruled her thoughts, but now admiration, respect, and perhaps something deeper had taken its place. She realized that Elias had not only proven himself to the Violians, but had also changed her perception of humans entirely. Courage, intelligence, and empathy were not limited to one species. Humans, too, could embody these traits, and in Elias they shone brightly. That night, Lyra could not sleep. She lay in her chamber, thinking of the day's events, the danger that had struck, and the human who had faced it without hesitation. She thought of his calm gaze, his careful actions, and the way he had looked at her with silent reassurance in the midst of chaos. For the first time, she felt a deep trust, not only in him as a protector, but in him as a being she could respect, perhaps even admire. The palace was quiet, the lights dimmed, but Lyra's thoughts raced. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more tests, more interactions, and more opportunities to learn the truth about the human groom. She no longer feared. Instead, she felt anticipation, curiosity, and an unexpected hope. She whispered to herself, "Perhaps the stories were wrong. Perhaps he is not what I feared. Perhaps he is something far greater." And in that quiet moment, as the twin moons rose over Violia, the first seeds of trust and admiration took root in Lyra's heart, marking the beginning of a bond that would grow stronger with every trial, every challenge, and every shared experience. The morning sun bathed Violia's crystal towers in a soft golden light, illuminating the palace gardens in a glow that made the flowers shimmer like fireflies. The city seemed calm after yesterday's attack, but Princess Lyra felt a new kind of excitement in the air. Today, she would walk with Elias not as a stranger, nor as a candidate under trial, but simply as someone she wanted to understand better. Lyra waited near the central fountain, her fingers brushing against the smooth crystal edge. She thought of the human who had saved the palace and its citizens, whose calm courage and quick thinking had earned the admiration of the elders, and herself. She had feared him once, imagining cruelty and unpredictability, yet now her fear had melted into curiosity and respect. Elias arrived, walking with ease, his steps deliberate yet relaxed. He smiled as he saw her. "Good morning, princess," he said, his voice gentle. "I thought we could explore the gardens today, away from the trials and ceremonies." Lyra nodded. "I would like that," she said softly. She realized she wanted to see the human beyond the role of groom or hero. She wanted to understand his thoughts, his world, and the choices that had made him so different from what she had feared. They walked along winding paths lined with luminous plants, some swaying gently despite the still morning air. Birds with iridescent feathers flitted overhead, singing melodies that seemed to resonate with the light itself. Lyra spoke first, her voice cautious but curious. "Tell me about your world, Elias, Earth. I only know what the Council has shared in stories and records." "But I want to hear it from you." Elias nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Earth is complicated. It has mountains, oceans, forests, cities. It has people who do great things and people who do terrible things. Humans are often misunderstood, just as I think your people might misunderstand us." Lyra smiled faintly. "Yes, I have feared humans for many years, believing the stories. I imagined cruelty and recklessness. But you are not what I expected." He looked at her steadily. "Thank you, I am not all humans, but I am one of them, and we are not all the same. Fear is often born from stories, from what we are told. The truth is in what we see and experience ourselves." Lyra felt her chest warm. His words were simple, yet they carried a wisdom she had not expected. Humans, she realized, were not only capable of courage in battle, but also understanding, thoughtfulness, and honesty. As they walked, Elias paused near a small pond, its surface smooth and reflective. "Your world, it is beautiful," he said, gazing at the water. "I have seen many worlds, but this one is unlike any I have known. The way light moves here, it feels alive." Lyra followed his gaze, seeing the reflection of the twin suns dancing on the water's surface. She felt a quiet pride in her home, in the traditions and culture of Violia. "It is our duty to preserve it," she said. "We must respect our history, our land, and all who live here." Elias nodded. "And you do. I can see the care in everything, from the gardens to the people. You honor your world, princess. That is rare even among humans." For a while they walked in silence, listening to the soft hum of the gardens. Lyra felt a sense of peace, unusual for her. She had spent so long fearing the human, yet now, walking beside him, she felt something entirely new, trust. "I have a question," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Do humans fight wars because they cannot control themselves, because they are cruel?" Elias shook his head. "Not always. Some do fight out of fear, misunderstanding, or greed. Others fight to protect what they love. We are capable of both destruction and great kindness. The key is the choice we make, not the species we belong to." Lyra thought of yesterday, of the human who had faced danger without hesitation, saving lives and preserving peace. She realized that courage was not cruelty. Strength was not dominance. Humanity, she saw in Elias, was capable of honor and empathy. They reached a quiet grove where the air was cool and the light soft. Flowers glowed in delicate patterns and small creatures moved among the roots of trees, curious but cautious. Elias knelt to observe them. "Your creatures are fascinating," he said. "They trust you to live in harmony with them. That requires patience, understanding, wisdom." Lyra knelt beside him, watching the small beings. "Yes, we value balance in all things. Even our smallest actions affect the world around us. That is why we have the trials of harmony. They teach respect, thoughtfulness, and understanding." Elias looked at her, eyes steady. "And you passed them all?" Lyra laughed softly. "I did not pass any. I am already part of this world. But you passed in ways I did not expect. You solved puzzles differently, moved with courage, and showed empathy. You understand more than you know." He smiled faintly, a shadow of amusement crossing his face. "I only try to act rightly, but thank you. That means a lot coming from you, Princess." They walked further, sharing stories of their worlds. Lyra listened to Elias describe Earth's oceans, its mountains, and its cities. She laughed at tales of human inventions, some clever, some clumsy, all inventive. In turn, she shared stories of Virelia's history, of festivals, rituals, and traditions passed down for generations. As the sun climbed higher, Lyra realized that their conversation was more than small talk. It was understanding. They were learning each other's worlds, each other's thoughts, and slowly each other's hearts. Fear had no place in this exchange, only curiosity, respect, and an emerging connection. At one point, a small stream crossed their path. Elias paused, observing it carefully. "On Earth, water moves like this in rivers and streams," he said. "It can give life and it can destroy. Humans learn to respect it, to work with it. I see the same here." Lyra smiled. "Yes, balance is everything. Our ancestors taught us that controlling nature is impossible. Understanding it is the key." For a long time, they stood silently by the stream, watching the water ripple over stones and around plants. Lyra felt a calmness she had never experienced before in Elias' presence. His calm gaze, his patience, his curiosity, it all made her realize that the stories she had been told about humans were incomplete, limited, and misleading. "You surprise me, Elias," she said softly. "I feared you once. I thought humans were dangerous, cruel, unpredictable. But you are none of these things. You are thoughtful, brave, kind, everything I did not expect." He looked at her with steady eyes, a faint smile on his lips. "Perhaps the stories about you were incomplete as well, Princess. I expected a being of grace, wisdom, and tradition. I did not expect someone to see beyond appearances so quickly. You are remarkable." Lyra felt warmth in her chest. She had not expected such words from a human. She had feared them, studied them, and even imagined their cruelty. And yet here he was, not only brave and intelligent, but capable of understanding her in ways she had not thought possible. As the day continued, they explored more of the palace grounds, learning from each other, exchanging thoughts and ideas. Lyra found herself laughing freely, listening closely, and even questioning her own assumptions. She realized that the human beside her was not a stranger, nor a threat, but a partner in learning and discovery. By the afternoon, they arrived at a quiet terrace overlooking the city. The twin suns shone softly, and the streets below were filled with citizens going about their lives, unaware of the deep bond forming above them. "You have changed my perspective," Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. "I once feared humans. I thought them cruel. But now I see strength, courage, and wisdom, and I see it in you, Elias." Elias looked at her, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Thank you, Princess. I did not come here to change your thoughts, only to act rightly, but I am glad to have earned your trust." Lyra smiled, a mixture of pride, respect, and something more she could not name. She realized that trust, once difficult to give, now flowed naturally. She understood him, not perfectly, but enough to know that courage, intelligence, and empathy transcended worlds and species. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the terrace in gold and violet, Lyra and Elias sat quietly, sharing a sense of understanding and connection that words alone could not convey. The fear that had once filled Lyra's heart was gone, replaced by respect, admiration, and a budding curiosity for what the future might hold. The day ended with a quiet promise. They would continue to learn, to explore, and to grow together. Not as princess and groom, not as human and alien, but as beings who had discovered trust, courage, and understanding in one another. For the first time, Lyra realized that the greatest lesson of all was not in the trials or the stories, but in the choices they made together. To see beyond fear, to act with courage, and to respect another being's heart. These were the foundations of true connection, and perhaps of a future that could unite two worlds. The day of the ceremony arrived with a sky painted in soft hues of gold and pink. The palace of Violia shone brighter than ever, its towers reflecting the twin suns in dazzling patterns. Citizens from all corners of the city gathered to witness the historic union, murmuring with excitement and curiosity. It was not just the marriage of Princess Lyra and Commander Elias Kane, but a symbol of the alliance between two worlds. Lyra stood in her private chambers, dressed in ceremonial robes that shimmered like liquid crystal. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear but with anticipation. Today was the culmination of days filled with trials, challenges, and revelations. She had learned much about the human who had once frightened her. She had seen courage, intelligence, empathy, and honor in him. And now she would face him as a partner, not a stranger. Her mother, the queen, entered quietly. "You look radiant, my daughter," she said, smiling. "Remember, this day is not just about tradition, but about the future. Trust in what you have learned and in the man who has earned your respect." Lyra nodded, taking a deep breath. "I will, mother. I trust him. I admire him." The queen placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then you are ready." Across the palace, Elias prepared for the ceremony. His uniform gleamed, and his posture was calm yet purposeful. He had studied the Viorlian customs carefully, respecting every tradition while keeping his human nature intact. His mind was focused on one thing, honoring Lyra and the world she loved. As he stepped onto the ceremonial platform, he saw Lyra descending the grand staircase. She moved with grace, her robes catching the light, her eyes steady and confident. For the first time, he saw not fear but strength and curiosity in her gaze. She was no longer a princess intimidated by stories of humans. She was a partner, ready to meet him fully. The ceremony began with the traditional vows, words that had been passed down through generations. Lyra and Elias spoke in turn, their voices carrying over the assembled crowd. Lyra's words were deliberate and sincere, reflecting her understanding of trust, honor, and unity. Elias' words were measured, showing respect for the customs while expressing his own convictions and intentions. As the ritual continued, the elders guided them through the symbolic acts that represented harmony between their worlds, exchanging ceremonial tokens, lighting twin flames, and walking together through a path of flowers that symbolized cooperation and growth. Elias followed the steps carefully, yet with a quiet confidence that impressed even the most traditional elders. At one point, a small challenge was presented, a puzzle meant to symbolize mutual understanding. A series of glowing spheres hovered before them, each containing an image representing life on Earth and Violia. The task was to align the spheres in a pattern that demonstrated balance between the two worlds. Lyra glanced at Elias, half expecting hesitation. Instead, he approached the puzzle with calm focus, observing each sphere carefully. He rotated them not in the expected sequence, but in a way that created a new, elegant pattern blending both traditions. The elders gasped in admiration. This was not just completion, it was innovation that respected both cultures. Lyra felt her chest swell with pride. She had feared him once, believing the stories, but now she saw a human capable of honoring her world while bringing his own wisdom and creativity. The fear that had once shadowed her heart had completely vanished, replaced by admiration, respect, and trust. The final part of the ceremony was the exchange of vows from the heart. Lyra stepped closer to Elias, her voice soft yet strong. "I once feared what I did not understand. I once believed that humans were cruel and reckless. But I have learned that strength is not cruelty, Courage is not dominance, and honor can come in many forms. I trust you, and I choose to walk with you, side by side, into the future of our worlds. Elias took her hands gently. Princess Lyra, I came here as an outsider with stories and fears of my own. I did not come to conquer, but to learn, to protect, and to honor. You have shown me your world, your wisdom, and your heart. I vow to stand with you, to respect and cherish you, and to work with you for the harmony of both our people. A hush fell over the crowd. The words were simple but powerful. They reflected the bond that had grown over trials, shared understanding, and courage. Lyra looked into Elias' eyes, seeing the calm strength and kindness that had drawn her from fear to trust. The elders pronounced them united, and the crowd erupted in celebration. Lights shimmered and music echoed through the city. Citizens cheered, some bowing in respect, others raising their hands in joy. The union was not just a ceremony, it was a promise of unity, trust, and cooperation. As the celebrations continued, Lyra and Elias walked through the palace gardens, now peaceful and filled with life. They observed the citizens, the glowing creatures, and the vibrant flora. Lyra felt a deep sense of connection, not just to Elias, but to the possibility of a future where humans and Virelians could coexist and thrive. You have changed more than my mind, Lyra said softly, her eyes on the horizon. You have changed the way I see humans. I once feared stories, but you have shown me truth. Courage, intelligence, kindness, these are not bound to a species. They are bound to the choice to act rightly. Elias smiled. And you have shown me the same, Princess. You have taught me patience, respect, and the beauty of a world so different from my own. I could not have imagined a better partner. They stopped by a small pond, the reflection of the twin suns glimmering on the water. Lyra reached for Elias' hand, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his grip. For the first time, she felt complete trust, not just in his ability to act, but in the person he was. You are not cruel, she whispered, half to herself, and you never were. Elias looked at her, understanding her meaning. I hope I never will be, Princess, but fear is a natural thing. You overcame yours, and that makes this moment even more important. Lyra nodded, feeling the depth of truth in his words. She realized that fear, once guiding her thoughts, had been replaced by trust, understanding, and something more. A bond that could grow stronger with time, respect, and shared purpose. As the evening drew near, the palace lit up in a spectacle of glowing lights, reflecting on the crystal towers and casting long, dancing shadows. The citizens of Virelia celebrated late into the night, honoring not only the union of Princess Lyra and Commander Elias Kane, but also the possibility of a future shaped by courage, empathy, and understanding. Lyra and Elias stood on the terrace, gazing out at the city below. The wind carried the soft hum of celebration, and the twin moons rose in the sky, casting silver light over the crystal towers. Lyra leaned slightly into Elias, feeling the strength of his presence and the calm steadiness of his heart. Do you think our people will accept this? She asked quietly. They will, Elias said confidently. Not all at once, but they will see the choices we make, the actions we take, and they will understand. Fear fades when trust grows, Princess, and respect lasts forever. Lyra smiled. I see that now. I see the truth in what you do, what you are. I once feared the human groom, but now I see the partner, the protector, the one who can walk with me into the future. Elias' gaze met hers, steady, honest, and filled with understanding. In that moment, Lyra knew that the stories, the fears, and the misconceptions were all gone. They had been replaced with truth. Courage, intelligence, empathy, and trust could cross worlds, species, and generations. The celebration continued below, but above, in the quiet terrace, the human and the alien princess stood together, their hands clasped, their hearts aligned. Two worlds had met, not in fear or misunderstanding, but in respect, honor, and connection. And as the twin moons shone above, Lyra whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, the stories were wrong. The human groom is not cruel, he is everything I hoped for and more. Elias squeezed her hand gently, a silent promise of shared adventures, challenges, and triumphs yet to come. Together, they would lead their people into a future of unity, trust, and understanding. And for the first time in her life, Lyra felt not fear, not doubt, but certainty. Certainty that this human once feared was the partner she had been waiting for, the bridge between worlds and the beginning of a story far greater than either could imagine alone.